Hi. It is really good to be back. Like I said before, I missed you all a lot. I'm glad to be back. And I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit with you. Coming off of a really busy spring and looking at what looks like a really exciting fall in this congregation. This year I made a choice that I've never made before in this congregation. I chose to take all of my vacation time in one big chunk. Now, I knew it was risky. I thought, what if I get bored while I'm away for all that time? What if you all forget me when I come back? Now, knowing things were in good hands with my colleagues here, I put any hesitations aside. I knew it would be good to rest, and I knew there are always good reasons, like Jason was talking about, to break from our normal routines. After all, we were made. It's been woven into who we are. It's been woven into life itself. We need rest. We need recharging. Biblically, we see it from the get-go, right? God creates the world as the creation myth goes, and then on the seventh day, what does God do? Rest. Some of the first rules laid down in the Bible have to do with rest, not only for we as humans, as humanity, as children of God, but for the land itself. The land is supposed to lay fallow every once in a while as well. We need rest and renewal. If we don't rest, we will burn out. We will be less fruitful. And not only that, but if we don't rest and renew, we are not going to be our very best selves. We're going to be less creative. Our patience will be shorter. Our tempers quicker. Our stress levels will rise too high. Then we won't be our best as fathers and mothers, as spouses and friends, as children and students and workers. And we certainly won't be our best as followers of Jesus. Which leads us to wonder, in some ways, how Jesus handled rest and renewal. And takes us to our scripture today. Jesus, in this scripture, sadly has just received news of the execution of his friend, John the Baptist. It's from Matthew 14, 13 to 23. Now, when Jesus had heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they looked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. We normally end the story there, but I'm going to read a bit further. Immediately Jesus we're talking about, made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. First, it's notable, right? Jesus took time away. Not just once, but twice in just these 11 verses. The first time he retreats to gather himself, it seems, to grieve the death, the execution of his friend John the Baptist. It says he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Time to process the news, one would imagine. Maybe he got his batteries recharged a bit too, because right after this, he feeds the 5,000. Now, we've heard that story time and again, so I won't go into it. But again, then we note that right after He feeds the 5,000. Verse 22, immediately after that, he made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. In a way, I think this is a little funny how this is translated. Jesus makes the disciples get into a boat. It sounds like they didn't want to go. He makes them get into a boat and doesn't tell them, come back and pick me up in 5 minutes. No, he sends them to the other side, and then he dismisses the crowds. And then he goes up the mountain, again, by himself, clearly looking for some rest, some retreat. Now, as I reflect back on these last few weeks of vacation myself, I've been thinking about what made them so good. They were excellent. I was thinking about where God has come in for me in these last weeks. And I want to share a little bit with you, realizing that I've lived a life of real privilege in these last couple of weeks. I had the chance to spend some time alone with Karen when we went hiking and backpacking together. I had time with extended family on the trip of a lifetime. I had time with some friends who I grew up with in Arizona. And I want to give you kind of a sort of, when teachers come, I know there are a number of teachers here today, sort of that assignment that you got growing up when the teachers would make you write that first assignment of the year, what I learned on my summer vacation, okay? So here's what I learned. It's just 3 things. First, do nothing. If you can't do nothing, do just one thing. And if you do just one thing, make it worth your while. And third, break your routine and then put it back together with family and God at the center. So first, I want to start with do just one thing. Now, I know that doing just one thing is kind of blasphemy in this multitasking world that we live in. Perhaps some of you right now, I can see pretty well from up here, by the way. Perhaps some of you are, doing a grocery list or Snapchatting. I'm looking at you, back top row. Or who knows? But letting go of multitasking and embracing, I don't know what it's properly called, single tasking, unitasking, monotasking, whatever you want to call it. It's an exercise in mindfulness. It's an exercise in being in one place at one time, whether on vacation or not. And actually, studies show that if we do one thing at a time, we actually do it better, we do it more quickly, and we're more likely to remember what we have done. Am I the only one who does something and then forgets 10 minutes later whether you've done it or not because you're doing 3 other things at the same time? Studies show that we're actually more productive when we monotask, and our mental health is improved. Case in point here, about a week ago I was fishing with some of my childhood friends who I've known since before I can remember. So every August we carve out time that we all get together. We grew up in Phoenix, but we now live coast to coast. This year we were fishing on Kurt's 21-foot boat. Now I mentioned the size of the boat. Here's a good picture. It's not a great picture, but I'll tell you why I chose this one in a minute. As you can imagine, this boat does not have bathroom facilities. It's not a huge boat. But as you can also imagine, when out fishing all day, nature will call. And so I was answering one of nature's calls when all of a sudden a coho salmon hit the pole that was right next to me. You can kind of see the poles here, that's the way they sit with downriggers. All of a sudden the pole hit, and I had only one choice, right? Pick up that pole. And so I picked up that pole and I reeled it in, and I was really happy because it's a modest catch, but nevertheless it was a catch. And well, you can notice the shot is only from the waist up. Sometimes you should only be doing one thing at a time. Monotasking is very important. Now, on a little bit more serious note, this was also the same day that the eclipse happened, and just hearing some of the stories from people who were watching the eclipse, especially in some of the places that had the path of totality, as it was called, where you hear just these evocative stories about just emotion that wells up, recognizing our place, not only our place in the world, but our place in the universe and where we lie. But I think there's also something about just what else would you do when watching the eclipse but watch the eclipse? There's something powerful about doing one thing at a time. Now, if you want to get really radical, you can go from just doing one thing at a time to doing nothing. Now, I said you can do one thing or you can do nothing. It's even more radical for rest and renewal when you do nothing. You realize the word vacation has the same root word as vacancy or vacate, meaning emptiness. And the word holiday, which we have on our screen today, holy day, comes from the phrase holy day. There's a sense that when we have encounters with God, we are reduced to inactivity. And so one of my mantras for this vacation was a quote that struck me a while back, and I wanted to carry it with me throughout. The quote is this: "Sometimes there are worse things to do than nothing." Sometimes there are worse things to do than nothing. In this hyper-productive culture and world in which we live, that seems like nonsense, but it's far from it. How often do we fill our lives with just the drivel of stuff? I'm standing here and I don't have anything to do, so what do? I take out my phone and I check and see if I got an email, see who's tweeting what on Twitter, see if I got a text message. Or I pick up the newspaper, or I do a crossword, or whatever, because sometimes it's uncomfortable to do nothing. And it's tough. We literally have the world at our fingertips these days on these devices. And it's tough because we live in a world of busyness and activity that is thought to indicate success and personal importance, right? If I'm super busy, that means I'm an important person, right? Somebody says, "How are you these days?" And you say, "Well, I'm not really doing much." What's the thought? You should be doing something, right? Put down the phone. Stop playing the game. Don't pick up the newspaper or crossword. Take a hiatus. Take your own little vacation from checking email. And sit. Breathe. Soak it in. Essentially, this is doing your version of what Jesus did when he pushed offshore on that boat or when he walked up that mountain. Maybe for you, it's a slow walk in the woods. Maybe it's sitting in your living room and watching the trees sway in the wind. Maybe it's listening to the birds. Maybe it's just sitting in silence. Do nothing. I dare you. Now, when you decide to do something, this is the second point, when you decide to do something, make it worth your while. 3 or 4 times a year, I take a vacation day to train Brethren volunteer service workers, like our very own Sarah Yule, back from working a year in California. At these orientations, I teach sessions on resiliency and peacemaking, and we start, right, Sarah? We start at 9 a.m. and we go to, 9:30 at night. It is a big, long day. And oftentimes, if it's local, I will wake up early that morning. I'll teach until 9:30, and then I'll drive home. These are some of the best vacation days that I spend every single year. It's one of those things that you're invited to do, and one of those things where they actually will pay you a little bit of money to do, but don't tell them, but I would do it for free. When you do decide to do something, make it worth your while, especially with your free time. Make it an intentional choice. So that's 2. That's the second. And last, break your routine and then reassemble a new routine with family and with God. Vacation is an opportunity to be away, obviously. It's an opportunity also to be away from our normal routine, even if we don't leave home. Which also means it's a chance to break habits that are bad, that have become part of our everyday routine. It's a chance for, it's a little weird, it's a chance for recreation. It's a chance for recreation. As we withdraw from our normal work and entertainment and mindless activities, as we let go of our identities as woven through the strands of career and accomplishment and zip code and income statement and our clique at school, we not only create a moment to break bad habits, we create a moment to rediscover who we really are. At the core, who am I really? What do I really care about? Where will I spend that time when it needs to be spent? What's important to me? What do I need to let go, and what do I need to bring in? How are my relationships, really? How are they? Routines broken can create opportunities to break bad habits as well, and then put them back together. Now, one of these, for me, was a once-in-a-lifetime experience this summer. If you're on Facebook, I've heard a number of people mention it to me this morning. If you're on Facebook, you know a little bit about this already. My mother-in-law, Lois Davidson, spent many of her formative years in Africa, both as a child and then serving as a nurse in her adult years. This is also the time in which she became a mother. My wife, Karen, and my sister-in-law, Kim, were born in Tanzania. So it has been Lois's dream since, I think, the moment the kids came into the world, to take the kids to this part of the world that has so much meaning for her. And this was the year. So we planned and we packed and we went. And of course, the animals were incredible. The scenery was inspiring. We learned a lot about cultures and our kin on the other side of the world. But for me, some of the most valuable times, some of the most important times, were the times when we were sharing the mundane together. 17-hour flights, long, bumpy car rides. Times when our rough edges, individually, were harder to hide. Times when our love for each other was more apparent. Our routines had been broken and reassembled in some beautiful ways as a family. When old routines are broken, we have openings to create new routines. Whether it's a new plan to carve in time with God, to pray and listen more intently, whether it's to replace a negative pattern with a positive pattern, whether it's to gain perspective about who we are and what we really care about. It's an opportunity. It's a chance. Now, I know this may seem like an odd time in some ways to talk about vacation and rest and renewal. After all, vacation time is coming to a close. School starts tomorrow. Programs here at church are ramping up. But in a way, that's really the point. Jesus, to our knowledge, didn't really, maybe other than the 40 days, take a full week away to wind down and to disconnect. He pulled the boat away from the shore for a while. He didn't need to travel to another continent. He hiked up the mountain right there. So what we're talking about isn't just advice for having a good vacation. It's about living life day in, day out, week in, week out, with more intentionality, with more purpose, closer to family, closer to God, with intention. It's about taking time with God. It's about creating higher quality time with family and friends. It's about setting new routines so we're better people, our best selves. And when we do that, we're better prepared to meet the challenges of the day. And as we know, the challenges are many in this day. Next week, we're going to begin a series on peacemaking. And as you can imagine with peacemaking, we're going to discover it's time to get down to work. We're going to tackle issues like racism, war, interpersonal conflict. There is work to do. But for now, as we go into this afternoon in the church picnic, maybe we can be like one of those 5,000 that Jesus fed, renewed and nourished for this journey.